Hello and congratulations on owning a copy of The Great Travel Warriors of Bharat. This book honors 17 of the most prominent travel fighters who fought for our country's independence. Of these, 13 are men and 4 are women. The 4 women being Rani Liu, Helen Lepcha, later known as Savitri Devi, Putli Maya Devi Taman, and Dashriben Chaudhary. We would have, of course, liked equal representation from both the genders, like 10 men, 10 women, or 9 men, 9 women. But unfortunately, the details, the biographical details of many of the other tribal fighters are less known or obscure, and we really would need more research done to validate the credibility of the information that is currently floating around, and so they would have to wait for a future time to be published. So in this book, we have taken the decision to honor these 17 warriors. But even though we have not included all of them, we have definitely read them. And so having read so much about all these brave, fearless men and women, to my observation, there were a few things which I found in stark contrast between the lives of the men warriors and the women warriors. So in this video, I would like to share with you my 5 observations. For the men, fighting involved physical power. And why not? Because in most of the cases, they were either the crown prince or the future king in waiting rather, or going to be the chief of the community. So it was mandatory for them to be trained in martial arts. And in other cases, the boys of the community were supposed to be well versed in using the bow and the arrows, have knowledge about different kinds of arrows, learning to use a device which looks more like the lathi, the javelin, and stuff like that. So very primitive weapons for that time, but the men folk were quite used to it, as against the women, because it's understood that at that point in time, daughters of the communities were not expected to be good at this. This was not their primary responsibility. So taking care of the physical security of the family or the community was primarily the man's job. So that kind of a division is quite understandable. But when it came to fighting the outsiders, the East India Company and later the British government, women jumped in, and of course the physicality part of it was out of bounds initially for a lot of them, so they had to serve at an intellectual capacity. They had to prove that they have it in them to do this, so they would serve as messengers, carrying secret codes, gathering resources and stuff like that. But as Helen Lepcha proved, that once you have shown that you have the intellectual capacity, you can go ahead and show your physical prowess as well, because she herself was on horseback on several occasions warding off the British soldiers who were charging after her because there was an arrest warrant out in her name. And then the women showed their physical strength in another manner as well. For instance, when Dashriben was courting arrest during the Quit India movement, during that time, some of her fellow fighters, they were really very young, they got married young, and they were about to have children, so they were carrying babies, as in they were pregnant, and in some cases a couple of them were not even aware of it, but still they faced the wrath of the police, they got lathi charged, and they went to prison, and when in jail they delivered babies, absolutely healthy babies, by the grace of God. But that is the kind of physical endurance that they showed. So both are definitely at different lanes, but yes, it is a marked difference. For men, it was all about a show of testosterone. For women, it was displaying physical endurance along with intellect. The men warriors, by virtue of being the chief of the community or the king or the eldest of the community or the most well-traveled, well-experienced person, was by default automatically exalted to the position of being the leader of the community, and so all they had to do was command, and they had an army ready to fight on their behalf. Not so for the women. The only people that the men warriors had to fight were the men from the colonial forces. It was different for the women. First, they had to overcome the resistance from their families. Then, they had to fight off the opposition of the communities. Then, jump over the expectations that the society had of them. And only after all these 3 rounds of struggle did they come face to face with the British. This was very difficult, of course, as you can already guess. And in many cases, they were dissuaded with offers of marriage or an attractive job offer which came from the Britishers themselves. So nobody really expected daughters and wives and mothers of the men warriors to be part of this struggle, but that was the surprise, and in fact it was the game changer that helped India win its independence. Number 4 is something all of us will be able to relate because it is very much relevant in today's time. The men warriors were never presented with the dilemma of having to choose between family, marriage, and their passion of fighting for the country. Whereas for the women, this was the first thing that was put up to them, that if you go to fight, who's going to take care of the house? So for leaders like Purlimaya Devi Taman, Helen Rapcha, what they would do is, after their fathers left for work and they quickly finished their household chores, took care of their ailing family members and their siblings, they would go to school if they had school, or if they didn't have school, quietly retire and start working on their secret mission. And their secret missions would more often than not be sending letters, passing messages, or getting charkas delivered to homes, or teaching women to spin, but without the knowledge of the British officers, because most of the cases and most of the times their fathers or somebody in the family was working with the establishment. So having a family member being part of these kinds of activities was considered anti-national, anti-establishment, and so they risked the entire family of being jailed. So they had to keep it a secret. That was one thing. Second thing is, of course, they did not want to get married early, and in many cases they didn't want to get married at all because they wanted to fight for the country first. But then it had to be done because otherwise there was a lot of pressure on them to just get married like anybody else and run the family. The only option that seemed quite viable to the families was get married to a freedom fighter and then fast for him or take care of his family and show your patriotism in that manner. And that is the reason why there are a lot of stories where you will hear that the daughter gets married, then she sees her husband for the first time on the day of the wedding, and the next she knows or learns about him is when he gets martyred. But we don't have corresponding stories of husbands saying that I met her on our wedding day and the next I heard about her was when she got martyred. So a bit of a inequality over there, but that's how the times were. But despite all of it, our women leaders did go ahead and fight. That's what actually makes them a leader and a role model, relevant even for today's time. That no matter what, if you have made it your goal, you have to overcome every single obstacle thrown at you to achieve it. Now that does not mean that everybody goes ahead and throws obstacle at women because they have to do it anyway. That's certainly not the most welcome or kind thing to do. We need to try and reduce obstacles to them. But yes, these kinds of things are something which we have inherited, but our generation has to make sure that we can end it and make things better for the future. The fifth observation that I had was with respect to the goals of the fighters. When it came to the men warriors, their goals were more centered on helping the community to survive. So saving the community from being incessantly taxed or the illegal and unnatural revenue collection done by the East India Company, and their attempts to manipulate the community to control trade. These kinds of injustice is what the men warriors focused on fighting against, so that their community could grow and live. But when the women came into fight, then the focus opened up and became wider. It became, in my opinion, more holistic, because now they were not just going to try and survive, but also outgrow a lot of malpractices, superstitious beliefs, and take the community to a place where it could actually be called a free-thinking, independent one. So that meant overcoming bad things like illiteracy, child marriages, not allowing widows to get married again, and alcohol, gambling, unhygienic living, practicing untouchability, stuff like that. So with women coming in, the focus of the fights widened, and that in the long run ended up helping the community as a whole to evolve. And that is the beauty that comes out when you take a big picture view of the Indian freedom struggle's timeline, from being a primitive movement to becoming something which is intellectually and spiritually such a superior movement in fighting a colonial force, where it was literally said that the sun never sets in the empire. It's huge, it's impressive, and only people of great moral character could achieve it. And we are indeed blessed that we have such a diverse tribal community in the country that was so rich in these kinds of moral values, and they believed in living them, and not just living them, but fighting for them and going to any extent to preserve those values as well. If you found this video informative, please do give it a like and a share. And if it has inspired you to know more about these warriors, then you may consider ordering the book through the link given in the description section. And once you have read it, do leave us a review, and you can tag Rupa Books, Tuhin and me on our social handles. We are available on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. And after reading, if you do think that you have identified some more distinguishing traits between the men and the women warriors, do feel free to drop in a note. I'll be so delighted to hear from you. I'll see you again in another video with some more information about working on this book and the lives of our tribal freedom fighters. Until then, take care. See you soon. Jai Hind. Vande Mataram.